Hey guys, how's it going? Glad to see you. So I'm using Restream today, and I noticed that when I use Restream, for some reason my lips aren't moving at the same time that the noise is coming out sometimes. But I'm doing this so I can simulcast this to Twitter as well as YouTube because I'm picking up a pretty significant following over at Twitter as well. So I wanted to be able to let you guys join in on this. And so I am attorney Michael Ehline. I am an attorney. I'm a member of the bar in Texas as well as California. And although my background is in, hold on one second. My background is in tort law as well as appeals and writs. That's how I got my start doing appeals and writs, habeas, and criminal defense. But presently, I make my money doing, or my Federal Reserve notes doing workers' compensation and personal injury law, both plaintiff as well as defense. And I've got a pretty well-rounded history in the law. I've got over 20 years in now as a lawyer. And I'm hoping that you guys can hear me. Give me some 5x5s if you're joining me. A lot of you guys might be suffering from the after effects of the 4th of July. So I'm hoping that I'll pick up a few people this morning. I'm headed to the gym. And so what I like to do, because I don't really make any money off my YouTube videos or Federal Reserve notes, I don't make any FRNs, I don't make any fiat currency off of these shows. I mean, if I do, it's not enough to where it makes up for the attorney time that I spend. But nothing that I'm going to tell you today should be construed as legal or financial advice. People who call me asking for legal advice, I can't do that for you. I'm not a financial advisor either. Now, if you want to pay me a retainer fee and hire me as your lawyer, hey, Jason, good seeing you, brother. If you want to pay me and hire me as your lawyer, I have no problem blocking out time to talk to you. But for you people who think that you can just call me and get free legal advice, well, I just look at that as totally disrespectful. And so I'm not going to do that. But what I will do is share my spare time on my way to the gym to sort of explain to you what's going on with civil asset forfeiture and what the Trump administration's been doing. Good seeing you, Grain Free. What the Trump administration has been doing to build their strategic Bitcoin reserve. And I'm pretty disappointed, to be honest with you, because I don't believe that the medieval deodand, which is what this is based on, and then ultimately became a common law principle, is being used to basically seize people's property. And I'm going to talk about what's going on and how the strategic Bitcoin reserve is being built. And that's by seizing assets. And there's a history of the government, whenever it's running short of money and can't achieve its goals of pillaging the American people, it will pillage more. And we saw that happen. Well, we saw Woodrow Wilson sell out our economic system to foreign bankers like the Rothschilds and the Rockefellers, even though they were onshore. But you know what I mean? People who are enemies of the republic. And we saw that Roosevelt passed a law to seize our gold. Well, a lot of you guys have heard Bitcoin being described as liquid gold or a store of value. So what I'm going to do is try to take you on a quick journey as to what's going on and why I'm very disappointed in the medieval deodand being used, which is what I think it is. That's right, Lenny. Yeah, thanks, Jason. And I'm also a legal historian, so I became a lawyer on the law study program, and I spent most of my formative years in private Christian schools as well as studying in libraries because my parents got divorced at a young age, felt pretty abandoned, and so I spent most of my time at the law library and then taking judo and stuff like that, and then going to visit my dad whenever I could. So it was pretty rough. And so that's the way I got my solace, was to learn history. And I read pretty much every book that I could find at the library, from medical to legal to history, and found that my joy was military history. And so it makes sense that I would understand quite a bit about maritime law and the law of conquest and the law of war. And so what's going on right now, I just want to lay a little foundation. I'm not bragging. I just want you guys to know my background. I'm not someone who was brainwashed in one of these Marxist government-run education propaganda hospitals, right, where they brainwash your children into hating our founding fathers and into loving the fiat currency system with their stupid Keynesian economics nonsense, smoke and mirrors bullshit. So I'm going to lay things out for you as a blue collar guy who spent most of my formative years after I got out of the Marine Corps. I was disabled from the Marine Corps in construction, having a construction company, being a professional limousine driver, being Rodney Dangerfield's chauffeur. So I have a lot of real life experience, and I've been exposed to a lot of interesting people in my life. And so I try to share things with you from a real world perspective, not from some highfalutin, I'm better than you because I'm a lawyer perspective. Because to me, being a lawyer was a necessity. It was, look, having a construction company, having clients trying to get out of paying and go onto the CSLB or threatening the CSL to go to the CSLB, the Contractor State Licensing Board. I realized that, man, I better become a lawyer or at least a paralegal. So I became a paralegal, and then ultimately I became a lawyer on the law study program. So what we're going to talk about right now is the medieval Daodan in Bitcoin, and not just Bitcoin, but cryptocurrencies in general. Now, I believe that the Federal Reserve Bank hates cryptocurrencies. They hate the BRICS system, and I believe that's why Israel attacked Iran, because I believe that Israel are the primary stakeholders in our Federal Reserve banking system. Give me a bunch of ones if you agree. The secular atheists who run Israel, I believe, run our Federal Reserve banking system. These are not religious people by any stretch of the imagination. They say that over 51% of them or more are atheists. And so we know that that's where communism and Marxism came from. Their official state religion, for lack of a better word, is atheism. So these are the same people who want to control every aspect of your life with fiat currency. And Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies offer a way for us to have financial freedom from the government and from the privately run Federal Reserve banking system. And so because Mr. Trump was not able, and by the way, I'm a libertarian, I'm nonpartisan here. There are a lot of things that I support about Trump, like secure borders and in a Bitcoin system, but I don't like some of the methods that he's using. I think they're very tyrannical. And one of them is the Maritime Law, which was originally the medieval Daodan system. And so what that is, just to give you a brief history, is before we had torts and personal injury laws in medieval England, if your cow or your chattel property caused damage to me, to my property or to my fence, the government could seize your chattel, right? And then they could take that and give it to the victim. And so without a conviction, without a finding of a crime, simply it was considered to be an offense against God, and that was called the Deodand. And so what it means is to be given to God. That's literally what it means. It would be given to the state, actually. So that's where Deodan comes from loosely, is basically if your property commits an offense against the king's property, for example, the king can seize that property that caused the offense. And modernly, moving fast forward, and when I stop at the gym, I took some notes and I'll blast through them very quickly. Modernly, what the police do is they'll pull you over without a Fourth Amendment. They'll engage in a consensual encounter, so they don't have to get a warrant, and they'll get you to admit that you have a large sum of money. Then they'll call out a drug sniffing dog, and of course 90% of currency has drug residue on it. And of course we know that they can train dogs to alert on anything, right? And so these police departments that are strapped because of companies like Uber eliminating a primary source of their income, DUIs. We know that police, their primary job is to raise revenue. They call them revenuers or tax collection agents, right? Since they can't raise revenue as much as they could, They're trying to find creative ways to get money for their department and, of course, get a promotion. So if you can seize somebody's assets worth hundreds of thousands of dollars, you get the U.S. attorney on the phone. You say, hey, a drug sniffing dog alerted on this $100,000 in cash. The police department then turns the cash over to the federal government, and then the federal government seizes the asset, and then they split part of that seizure with the police department, so it looks nice and legal. Then the police department's able to build a nice shrine to their new chief, a new building, or get new cruisers, make themselves look good, and position themselves so they can run for mayor, or whatever it is that they do, these political animals that tend to become municipal police. And that is basically, in essence, what civil asset forfeiture is used for. And I have explained this to you in other videos. If you go and look at some of my lives or just look on my channel for civil asset forfeiture, you can learn quite a bit about it. But in essence, what is happening now is the government, because we know that the fiat currency system is crashing, we know that it's unconstitutional, we know that treasonous turncoat politicians sold our country out to bankers at Jekyll Island in 1913. And they don't like it that Bitcoin is going to give us freedom. They're the ones who created the income tax system. Our founding fathers never, ever expected us to have an income tax system. Our country is based on life, liberty, and the pursuit of property, which equates to happiness. Property means happiness. What is the enemy of communism? Property, aka happiness. Equal misery for all is communism. And that is what basically the single party state of California wants for its citizenry and illegal aliens that it's flooded into its country, so they can use the census to redistrict the entire country blue. Every time they flood a sanctuary city with illegals, they pick up another Democrat House seat. So that's the way the whole game works. So I don't want to get too much into the census, but that's the reason why they're flooding the country with illegals. It's not because they want to help anyone. It's because they'll use the U.S. Census to redistrict and pick up new House seats. And it's, by some estimates, California would lose at least 5 Democrat House seats if illegals were deported. So, and that is facts, JM. Hey, HGO, good seeing you. So let's get into it really quick about Bitcoin. So I'm going to sort of front load this, and then I'll get into the history because I have some pretty extensive notes for you. I'm almost to the gym. So what's going on is, as the Federal Reserve System fails and the world screams out for what our founding fathers enshrined in our Constitution, an intrinsic money-based system based on gold or silver, the Federal Reserve Bank is and the U.S. Federal Reserve note, being the dollar, being the world's reserve currency, is losing its luster, and the dollar is losing its purchasing value. So it really doesn't have much to do with the political parties. They're just pawns because they're bought and paid for by these bankers, both parties. And Bitcoin is offering, as well as cryptocurrencies with blockchain technology, a way for you to protect your assets and your property and keep it shielded from the state. Well, the state doesn't like that. They don't like cold storage and things of that nature. And so what's happening is they're seizing people's Bitcoin. They'll come up with a charge, and then they'll seize the asset. And the asset is guilty until proven innocent because it's the property. So without a trial, without a jury, the government could just seize your asset, your Bitcoin. Now, a lot of people say, well, how are they going to do that? Bitcoin's blockchain. How are they going to be able to do that? Well, forensically, they can trace it to Robinhood or Coinbase. They can find the wallet that you transferred it to, or they can simply find on your computer when they seize it, if you were stupid enough to put your Bitcoin passwords and things like that on there, then they can simply get your password and get in there. And that's right. That's exactly what they're doing, Lenny. So really quickly, I'm just going to get into a really quick history of what's going on. So the U.S. government is now seizing Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies for civil asset forfeiture, primarily in jurisdictions where federal agencies such as the DOJ, the FBI, and the Secret Service, as well as the IRS, Criminal Investigations Unit, and DEA, as well as Homeland Security, a bunch of them, conduct investigations and operate. And these seizures are occurring across various federal courts, district courts in the United States. And I'll give you some notable cases, just so you know I'm not talking out of my rear end. A significant case involved a civil forfeiture complaint of over 225.3 million in cryptocurrency linked to a so-called cryptocurrency confidence scam. I mean, I don't know of anything that's more of a confidence scam than our privately run Federal Reserve banking system. Do you? I don't know of any. Now, tortimus, self-custody, we're going to talk about that in a minute because I thought the same thing until I started doing research. But self-custody would be a cold wallet, okay? And then there's online custody, like they call it a hot wallet, like Robinhood or Coinbase. So in any event, this particular seizure was one of the largest cryptocurrency seizures in U.S. Secret Service history. Now, in the Northern District in California, the DOJ seized over $1 billion worth of Bitcoin coin, uh, and that was linked to a Silk Road marketplace. And then the Eastern District of California seized 10.19 Bitcoin in a civil action in 2021. In the Eastern District of Virginia in 2025, the U.S. recovered 7 million in investment fraud proceeds through civil asset forfeiture, targeting funds from spoofed cryptocurrency investment websites, allegedly. Another civil asset forfeiture in Massachusetts targeted 87,637 tethers, which is another form of cryptocurrency. Good seeing you, Lenny. And that was seized from a Binance account. And that's why hot wallets are dangerous, right? Because they can just seize that right out of there. In other jurisdictions, federal agencies operate nationwide, and the seizures can occur whenever illicit cryptocurrency activity is traced. And this will obviously involve Binance, Coinbase, Kraken, and they're all subject to U.S. jurisdiction, right? That's why I like El Salvador. Now, Florida law enforcement, the state, has also seized cryptocurrency under the Florida Contraband Forfeiture Act. And so the governments are taking your Bitcoin without a warrant, without any Eighth Amendment protections, and just seizing it. And unless you have hundreds of thousands of dollars to pay a lawyer, good luck getting it back. Now, typically, the cryptocurrencies are what are suspected of being involved in illegal activities. So, investment fraud, pig butchering, money laundering, drug trafficking, ransomware payments. The Colonial Pipeline case, where 67.3 Bitcoin were seized. Darknet marketplace operations, et cetera, like Silk Road or Hydra Market. All right. So the government uses a blockchain analysis and forensic tools, often in collaboration with private firms like Chain Analysis, to trace the illicit funds to specific websites or exchange accounts. So this is the problem with you guys with cold wallets. How do you receive the transfers into your cold wallet? Usually from an online platform, right? That's not secure. So they'll trace it, and then they'll seize the assets, and they'll use agencies like the U.S. Marshal Service. Then they'll liquidate the asset, or they'll retain it with the strategic Bitcoin reserve, right? And they hold the Bitcoin that's seized through civil asset and criminal forfeiture. So let's talk a little bit about the common law history of forfeiture. Civil asset forfeiture in the United States, it has its roots in English common law, which I loathe this particular aspect of English common law. I don't think it comports with American common law or our Bill of Rights. But in essence, again, like I told you before, it started with the English common law, ancient common law, and then worked its way into maritime admiralty law. So this is where the so-called sovereign citizens probably are onto something, okay? And it comes from the deodand. And it originates in medieval England from the Latin deodandum, meaning to be given to God. And it allowed for the forfeiture of an object or an animal that caused harm, such as an animal responsible for a human death. The forfeited item was given to the crown, with the proceeds often used for charitable purposes or to compensate victims, as I told you earlier. So this established the principle of holding the property accountable for the harm, independent of the owner's culpability. So they can just take your property and say, hey, Sorry, buddy, we don't have to charge you. We don't have to find you guilty of anything. And that's what they did. And so the deodand, although it wasn't directly incorporated into American law, it laid the groundwork for in rem proceedings. Okay. And I've talked about this in my other shows in the past. And that's what they use in modern civil forfeitures. In other words, it's an action against the property itself. So when you see a lawsuit, it'll say Michael Ehline or the United States versus $20 million in U.S. currency seized from Michael Ehline, for example. That'll be on the actual complaint that the government files. Now, maritime and admiralty law, this is where it picked up. So, English admiralty law treated ships as quasi persons, liable for offenses like piracy, smuggling, or tax evasion. In that way, the King of England could seize ships regardless of the owner's guilt, as they were seen as the offending instrument, the ship itself, the property. This was justified by the practical difficulty of prosecuting an owner or a crew on the high seas. Justice Oliver Wendell Holmes noted that ships were treated as living entities in maritime law, making their seizure. Well, let me turn down this AC. Hopefully, you'll be able to hear me better too. Making their seizure a logical extension of holding property accountable. This principle was codified in English law and carried over to the American colonies. Americans adopted this after the American Revolutions when the U.S. Congress adopted these forfeiture laws based on British maritime practices to enforce customs duties, which were a primary source of revenue during the early federal government. Seize of property, ships, and cargo for failing to pay taxes or duties, even if the owner was not directly culpable, just like the English did. The U.S. Supreme Court, through Justice Joseph Story, upheld these forfeiture statutes, emphasizing their necessity for suppressing offenses on the high seas, where prosecuting individuals was challenging. For example, seizing a ship involved in smuggling was seen as a practical way to enforce compliance. In 1966, the supplemental rules for certain admiralty and maritime claims was formalized into U.S. law, applying them to forfeiture cases and shaping modern civil asset forfeiture practices. Now, ultimately, there was a transition into modern civil in rem forfeiture proceedings, which was derived from maritime law. Hopefully, you're getting this so far, Lenny. And what's the matter, you? Good seeing you, by the way, brother. Which became the cornerstone of civil asset forfeiture in the United States, which basically allows the government to seize property without convicting the owner of a crime. So this was expanded in the 20th century with laws like the Comprehensive Crime Control Act of 1984 and Civil Asset Forfeiture Reform Act of 2000, CAFRA is what it's called, acronym. And that extended to forfeiture of assets like cash, vehicles, and ta-da, cryptocurrencies. So anything that was suspected of being linked to a crime. And if you look at Joe Stalin, right, which is like the model that the state of California uses, show me the man and I'll show you the crime, right? Show me the property and I'll show you that it was involved in some kind of a crime. So unlike criminal forfeiture, which requires a conviction, civil forfeiture only needs what they call probable cause, which is a lower burden of proof rooted in the maritime tradition of targeting the property itself. This has led to criticism for potential abuses, as owners must prove their property's innocence, reversing the typical burden of proof. So, application to cryptocurrency is simple. The maritime law principle and in rem forfeiture directly applies to cryptocurrency seizures, where digital assets like Bitcoin or XRP or Ethereum are treated as digital assets, and thus they're considered to be the offending property. So cases like the United States versus approximately 10.19321,397 Bitcoin, or the Silk Road seizure that I talked about a minute ago, allowed the government to file a complaint against the cryptocurrency itself, not necessarily the owner, mirroring historical maritime forfeiture. Now, here's the wrench for you guys. Blockchain technology's transparency allows authorities to trace transactions, okay, similar to tracking a ship's movements in maritime law. But challenges like pseudonymity and decentralized wallets echo the difficulties of prosecuting individuals at sea. See how that works, guys? So, modern applications, the US government's use of civil asset forfeiture for cryptocurrencies is growing, with agencies seizing billions of dollars in your assets. The Strategic Bitcoin Reserve, established in 2025, incentivizes seizing your Bitcoin. And rather than liquidating it. So they're not liquidating it like they were. Now they're seizing it and allowing it to grow in value as a store of value to offset our national debt because our dollar is weakening. And it raises concerns, obviously, about encouraging broader forfeiture actions. So critics argue that civil asset forfeiture rooted in maritime law obviously violates due process, and I'm one of those critics. And cases like the Philadelphia grandmother's home seizure illustrate potential overreach, especially when applied to cryptocurrencies, where innocent owners may hold tainted funds unknowingly. So, organizations like the Institute for Justice advocate limiting civil forfeiture to maritime and customs contexts or requiring a criminal conviction, citing Fourth, Fifth, and Eighth Amendment violations. The 2019 Supreme Court case of Timms v. Indiana confirmed that civil asset forfeiture is in fact subject to the Eighth Amendment's excessive fines clause. But here's the issue, guys, just really quickly, and then I'm going to go work out. And thank you for joining me, Lenny, and all my friends here. Cold storage is definitely an option. But a court can do what they did to Lane Myers. They can lock you up and find you in contempt if you refuse to give them your Bitcoin access codes, number one. Number two, if you do an online transfer, they can use your Wi-Fi connection, cloud, and probably other secret technologies that the CIA has that we're not even aware of to trace the asset back to you or your computer network to your cold wallet. And the only way that I know of to avoid this so far from my research would be to have a cold wallet that was purchased in a jurisdiction not subject to US law, and to only do Bitcoin transfers to and from that wallet to a cold network. And now cold networks have their problems as well because they're probably littered with undercover government agents. And that's another way that they could probably track it. So I'm not going to give you advice or anything like that on how to avoid having your assets seized. But rest assured that as the government gets further and further in debt, and they see Bitcoin as digital gold in a store of value, they'll probably end up doing what Roosevelt did, which is seize your gold. In this case, your digital gold. They'll tell you you're no longer allowed to own gold. Give us your gold. Give us your Bitcoin. And if you don't, we'll seize it because now you're in violation of the law. The property has committed a crime against the state by not turning itself over. And then they'll have your digital assets. So, what do you do? That's going to be a topic for a future discussion, probably for my subscription only paid members that we'll talk about in my back channel. But if you're somebody who is a Bitcoiner or a crypto guy, I would definitely love to be able to have you on my show and hear your musings and opinions on how you would handle this. But for me, what I've realized is that making purchases off Coinbase or Robinhood are problematic. Now, let me tell you something before I go. California, Communist Fornia, has already passed a law that if you keep your Bitcoin on an exchange like Robinhood too long, they can simply seize it without even telling you. They'll just assume that it was abandoned and they'll use that to help them pay off all the illegal aliens that they're giving free healthcare to because now they're in massive debt for allowing these sanctuary cities to destroy the California economy. Remember, less than 3% of the illegals that Biden invited into our country actually work. And the ones who do use fake social security numbers. And I know from working in workers' compensation law that they'll claim 99 dependents, send most of their money back to Mexico to feed their family down there. And it doesn't benefit the United States economy. So good seeing you, Mama Lion. So there's a lot of problems here, and I want you guys to be aware of what's going on, because I do believe that Bitcoin, gold, and silver are the only assets of any value. And I think the government recognizes that. And I believe that, I think you're probably right about Robinhood. I do believe that at some point the government will begin to try to seize your cryptocurrencies and digital assets. The difference between cryptocurrencies and our fiat currency system is cryptocurrencies are actually backed by something of value, whereas fiat currency is not. It's backed by a promise of the government, which I don't trust any politician. So we've seen that countries like El Salvador, who have adopted Bitcoin, are taken off. I mean, it's moving and shaking. He put all the criminals in jail. Bukele, he's sitting on at least 13 to 20 trillion dollars of real gold. You know, it's a volcanic area, and now Bitcoin. And we know that the international monetary, I forgot what it's called, the IMR, maybe, I forgot what it's called, but we'll talk about it in the future. They don't like it, and the bankers are doing everything they can to go after Bitcoin, and they're obviously going to pressure politicians to make it easier for them to seize your cryptocurrency, because it is something that's actually backed by something of intrinsic value, as opposed to fiat currency, which is backed by nothing but a promise of corrupt politicians. So with that being said, guys, I'm going to go hit the gym. I'm glad you guys all joined me today. Make sure to like and subscribe, and make sure to double tap that screen and support the channel. And obviously, I love super chats, but buy subscriptions. Buy subscriptions. They're cheap. It's like a buck or something. I don't know what it is, but it's a few bucks a month. That's a great way to support the channel, so I can keep bringing content to you that no one else brings you. I'm the only guy out there who's a lawyer who actually talks about things that really matter in this world, in my opinion. So with that being said, well, a few guys like Lados Law and the civil rights lawyer. But with that being said, make sure to like and subscribe. Make sure to how to get out of the stream right now. I don't see like a button that says, here we go, end stream. All right, guys. Anyways, with that being said, make sure to like and subscribe. Make sure to save, because we never know when the thought police are going to take down this channel. Semper Fi, do or die. Talk to you guys soon.